Hey, good morning. This is it. Final fourth round of existentialism and Christian faith. Lord, help us, teach us. And Martin Buber's I and Thou and Martin Heidegger's Dasein will help us to see you as who you are and to live out our faith, Lord, not just talk about it. In Jesus' name. Do you love to talk about your faith or do you live it? They will separate being a Christian and being a non-Christian. Those who love to talk about fishing, but never been on the boat. Those who love to talk about golf, but never been to the field. Those who just love to talk about helping the poor, but never been, it's like, oh man, I would love to help those urban poor someday. And I read 2,000 books on urban poor, and this is what you ought to do, but never been to urban poor. Shame on you, right? And so we're going to talk about that. What does it mean? We're going to start with Martin Buber. Chapter 5, Martin Buber, Relation, Existence, and the Tao, I and Thou Encounter. Martin Buber said in this book, all real living is meeting, encounter. I translate it as all real living is encountering God, thereby encountering myself through that God. During my PhD research at the Oxford Center for Mission Studies, I gained the singular gift, the gold of rigorous academic training. I learned advanced research methodologies, honed critical analysis skills, and navigated dense theoretical texts, tools that have shaped every lecture I teach and a book I write. Yet, amid those valuable lessons, the true diamond emerged from unexpectedly in one of Oxford's many secondhand bookshops. There, tucked between aging theology volumes and philosophy books, I stumbled upon Martin Buber's I and Thou, and discovery that would change everything. It really did change my life. I first read the books late one evening in my cramped Oxford apartment, exhausted by deadlines and driven by relentless tally of accomplishments. 65 countries visited, over 2,000 meetings convened, more than 1,000 new missionaries called out, and countless publications behind me. When a panic attack struck, I realized I had measured my worth by performance and expected God's blessing as a direct reward. Worse, I had neglected my own household and discovered to my shock that God had disqualified me from preaching until I learned to live the grace I proclaim. Oh, I get choked up reading this. It was in that moment of raw brokenness that I returned to Buber's text, focusing on mere 155 words on self-contradiction, written almost like a poem. This brief passage revealed how I had fashioned a flawless eye for public view while hiding my true, fractured self beneath layers of business and pretense. In that instant, the panic faded. I felt myself seen and accepted by the eternal Tao. Buber's insight set me free, teaching me that authentic faith is not a performance to be graded, but presence to be lived, one honest encounter at a time. Why am I getting choked up? My goodness. Highly recommend this book. Buy it. Download free at academia.edu. Martin Buber reminds us that our deepest need is not for more information, techniques, and programs, but for genuine encounters with one another. In this book, classic work, I and Thou, he contrasts the two fundamental modes of relating to the world and to each other. First, there is that I and it relationship. In this mode, we treat people and even the natural world, an object to be used, studied, or experienced from a safe distance. We categorize them, label them, and interact with them only insofar as they serve our purpose or satisfy our curiosity. Although I and it engagement can yield knowledge and practical benefit, it ultimately leaves both parties feeling isolated and instrumental. So I wrote in my self-contradiction already in my previous book, but let me read that again because it's so good. Let me read that because it is this self-contradiction, the false self that's constantly emerging. SC 155. 155 are self-contradiction. If a man does not represent the a priori of relation in his living with the world, if he does not work out and really realize inborn thou on what it meets it, then it strikes inwards. It developed onto the unnatural, impossible object of the eye. That is, it develops where there is no place at all for it to develop. Thus, confrontation of what it over against him takes place within himself. And this cannot be relation, presence, or streaming interaction, but only self-contradiction. The man may seek to explain it as a relation, perhaps as a religious relation, in order to wrench himself from the horror of the inner doppelganger. But he is bound to discover again and again the deception in the explanation. Here is the verge of life, flight of an unfulfilled life to the senseless semblance of fulfillment, and it's groping in a maze and losing itself ever more profoundly. Wow. I wrote Martin Buber poetry and Martin Buber. I wrote English and Korean edition, but actually it's Korean edition only. So I should really switch to English edition and rewrite and add the self-contradiction. What I think about Martin Buber. Wow, that would be a wonderful book. Well, Martin Buber reminds us that our deepest need is not for more information, technique, or programs, but for genuine encounter, right? First, there is that I and it relationship. In this mode, we treat people, even the natural world, an object to be used, studied, or experienced from the safe distance. We categorize them and label them, interact with them only insofar. I read that already. So, what does that mean? Hmm, don't use people. That's what it means. I watched Les Miserables musical almost 20 times. I think like 16 times in London. In that, Jean Valjean, he steals bread for his nephew and go to prison and eventually becomes a saint. It's more like Jesus. And toward the end, the last sentence of the play is, when I look at someone, I see the face of God. Wow. But we've learned to look at someone as number, means to what we want. Even pastors look at people as numbers. And just like my ex-friend who I cut relationship with for many decades, he been addressing people as, oh, it's nutritionless person, or in Korean, 영양가 없는, is useless. There's no use for him. I'm like, well, why do you say that? Until I became useless for him. And then even my final meeting, which I finally cut the relationship, after all of our sharing, and I was so, in a way, glad to see him and share about what I'm doing, writing a book on suicide and doing work in Cambodia for Cambodian proverbs, and he's going to help the Cambodian. He basically said, oh, you're just engaged in useless things. He told me that point blank. That's so useless. Right? Why don't you be so in his own ways? He was saying, why don't you live like me? I have 1,000 member church. I just retired, and you know I get to have all this benefit. Travel the world at the church expense, and church now pays him to travel business class, and because he said, oh, he has a back problem, so he's traveling to mission field in business class, and he really had sympathy for me. He felt sad that I'm such a loser, and I'm thinking, man, this is where our friendship ends. He really doesn't understand I and thou. To him, everyone, including me, was just I and it. I was a tool, and this tool became useless for him. So sad, but yeah, maybe we'll have a very long time in heaven to talk about his stupidity. But and I really pray. So what is I and it and I and thou? I mean, that's what I shared. using everyone as your tool to get what you want. Uh, well, I'm not going to do part 5, so I'm just going to briefly mention this. And Martin Heidegger. To dwell authentically is to own one's being toward death. Martin Heidegger basically was a disciple of Kierkegaard. He doesn't want to admit as a German. He cannot believe that he has to learn from Danish, this intellectually inferior race. Martin Heidegger, but man, wow. When I first encountered Martin Heidegger at UC Berkeley's philosophy department, I was at cramped seminar room with a handful of undergrads dissecting concepts of Dasein, being in the world, and mysterious temporary existence. At volleyed back and forth, quoting being and time and unpacking each other's understanding, I said, stunned. Every phase felt like an impenetrable fog, and I felt each session convinced I was the only person in the room too stupid to follow even single argument. I blame myself entirely. Surely it must be my lack of philosophical training or feeble intellect that kept me from grasping their points. Years and years later, many decades later, while teaching metaphysics at Royal University of Phnom Penh, Cambodia, the same Heidegger puzzle resurfaced. This time I taught them. Heidegger makes this speech when he was chosen as the chancellor of some university, 13 pages long. And I used that. And then I have the Cambodian people to translate it into Khmer. In the process, I realized, it's not lack of language. It's that they don't understand English. It's not lack of intellect, it's lack of language. So it wasn't, so, in those days, I actually took German because I want to read Kant and kick Heidegger in German because they're both German. And my German professor actually said after a while, so, sir, how many years more do I have to study German to read Heidegger or Kant in German? And they're all laughing and they say, well, their German is so difficult. We read their philosophy in English. I'm like, what's the point then? Why am I doing this? So I quit learning German. And that's the point. And it was not that I didn't understand the concept. I didn't understand the English. And so I was, and then, so I have to teach my student English conversion of their kamai, and especially nothingness. Dasein actually it means it's invented word by Martin Heidegger. There's no German term for Dasein, but so then it was really interesting how I walked through them and realized, wow, that's what I went through. It was much, much healing. Highly recommend it. Buy it, read it. I'll see you tomorrow.